Hi, it's me, Chio. Welcome. An author interview is beneficial to both the author and the interviewer, and it is entertaining and informative to the viewer or the readers or potential readers. Interviewer can be anybody from someone who is professionally an interviewer, another writer, a blogger, a reader, and so on. So, this advice ranges for all these people involved. Now, let's go over the things to do during the interview. Number one, make them comfortable but be professional. It's a fine line because, as I said before, a lot of authors are not public speakers, they are not used to it. I've gotten used to it, but sometimes I still find that my nerves get to me. Make the author comfortable. You do not want to start asking questions and the author is stuttering through the process. But you also want to be professional. There are certain kind of questions you shouldn't ask. There are certain kind of ways you should not probe the author. Don't force them to divulge personal things to them. So a good practice to make this is to talk to them, preferably face to face or a phone call if it's not possible to do face to face, but preferably talk to them before the interview starts. Let them get used to talking to you. Let them get used to how you handle questions before you start asking them the official questions, either with an audience present or just with both of you there. Number two, avoid spoilers. Sometimes I can't believe I have to say this. It's not that it's impossible to do an interview without bringing up spoilers. There are certain types of interviews, crowds, etc., that expect those spoilers to be there, perhaps because they've already read the full books and now they're talking to the author without knowledge of what the full story is. But there are a lot of interviews with authors where the majority of the audience present hasn't read the books and this is the opportunity to know if they're going to read the book. Don't spoil it for them. Please do not spoil the book for these readers. I'm one of those authors that do not like spoilers, so maybe this is me carrying it on my head. But as an author, as a reader, it can be almost impossible to pick up a book after it's been spoiled for you. The reasons for every action, conflict, motivation has been exposed. The end has been exposed. We told you all the characters who have died in the story. How would you want to pick up the book again? Please avoid spoiling books for the future readers this author is trying to get to, except when they do permit those spoilers to happen. Number three, never say I haven't read that book, especially if there are interviews about the book you're talking about. I've already addressed reading the book before the interview, but there are some instances where it's impossible to read the books before the interview. Don't tell the author that. Ask relevant questions. Do not bring up the fact that you have not read the book. And I say this because if the interviewer has not read the book, especially if you have an audience listening to this, reading the interview, listening to it, watching it, they are going to pick up from you. The audience is there to listen to what the interviewer is saying as much as they are there to listen to what the author is saying. The author is obviously going to want people to read their work. But if the interviewer has not read it, the audience is going to feel, is anybody actually interested in this book? Why should I read it? So do not put it out there that you haven't read it yet because the audience is going to be less inclined to read it too. Number four, make sure you do not put them on the spot by asking controversial questions, politically charged, religiously charged, etc. Except if their book is on that topic. There is no need to bring an author's personal beliefs or life into the interview because for a lot of authors, as much as they put what they understand or think of into their stories, they are not their stories. By bringing up these types of questions, you are creating that forced connection between their beliefs and the stories, even if those beliefs might not be in there. And that's going to affect the audience. The audience might think, oh, this author thinks of things opposite from I do. That means I can't read their book. That's not always true. So don't put that out there because also the author can get defensive, the audience can get tense. Avoid things that will stir animosity, confusion, and the rest. Number five, in line with number four, do not deviate from agreed questions. Now, there are some interviews that are very free, ask anything you want kind of interview. There's no planned set of questions. We'll go with the mood, the way the audience is leaning, the way we feel in the moment. But a lot of interviews, questions are prepared beforehand. There are different reasons for this. Again, some authors are not public speakers. Two, there are certain things they might not be comfortable talking about and they can't bring it up during the interview. So questions are prepared beforehand to make sure those things are avoided. So if you have done that process, if you and the author have both agreed we are sticking to these fixed questions, do not deviate. Do not give them surprise questions. They might laugh it off when everybody's there, when you're there, but it really sets the tone of if they'll ever do an interview again with you, because it is uncomfortable. You're willingly putting them in an uncomfortable position to get shock value and the rest. So when it can be avoided, especially if you've never had a discussion with the author to ask any type of question you want, avoid surprise questions that are meant to put them on the spot or throw them off their game or things like that. Number six, try and ask meaningful questions, not generic. There is nothing wrong with asking some generic questions because a lot of foundations for interviews are built off those generic questions, but your whole interview cannot be just about that. The reason is because the author wants to truly feel you understood their book. They want the audience to understand their book. And some authors get to go for a lot of interviews. Imagine having to go for 5 interviews in 2 months and everybody's asking the exact same question. Your attitude will change. You get more reluctant to answer those questions. So try to make your questions different. Try to make your interview different. Let it stand out in a positive way. That author will remember your work. The audience will remember your interview, to remember the author's work. And it just creates this beautiful synergy. So try to ask things that are unique or specific to the author's work. And lastly, compliment the author on their writing or on their books or just on their accomplishments. You might realize after reading their books that you don't like their style of writing, you don't like their story, but you agreed to do that interview. You called the author, or even if the author reached out to you, you agreed to do that work. So don't show up to the interview and treat the author or the author's work like it means nothing, because a lot of authors take months or years to write one story. At least compliment that effort for no other reason than it makes them feel good, honestly, because you're putting something that comes from your heart and mind and took years of nurturing and creating before you put it out there in the world. So the author is in a vulnerable position when your book is there for display for you to pick at it, ask questions. So giving them a compliment or two would help ease that tension, ease that fear of what will people say. It's just a nice thing to do and never hurts to be nice. Now, for the other part of the video, the things the author should do before the interview.